and Fisheries Committee. So I represent, for those who don't know, one of the, in my view, and I think statistically true, one of the most important fishing ridings in the country, the South Shore of Nova Scotia. So everyone, I think, who knows that will be shocked to learn that most of my questions here from Mr. Landenbergen, who is a regular at the Fisheries Committee, where I'm a member. 80% of what we catch in wild seafood is exported. 70% of what we consume is imported. That seems to be a strange combination that we all grapple with. But there is high demand, obviously, in Asia for our seafood products, and it has grown over the years. I'd just like to talk a bit about that challenge on diversification, because as China in particular engages in buying up businesses in Canada and everywhere in the world, one of the ways they're getting access to our seafood products is actually buying up those who buy the fish from the fishermen, so that they can control the where it goes and being exported. And we have a particular challenge in Nova Scotia where they also control the live seafood export facility at the Halifax Airport, run by First Catch. So I'm just wondering, how is it, and how, as the one of the spokesmen for industry, the industry that's so important, you can diversify within the region when one particular member is actually sort of doing an end around and trying to get control of the supply chain in Canada, and we're letting it happen.
That's a very good question, Mr. Chair. In terms of diversification, I think in our sector more than many others, the customer-supplier relationship really is so personal. Others have talked about long-term benefits of having an office in country. Many of our bigger companies, they have sales people in country, in China, in US, in Japan, in Europe, and other countries in Asia. We need more to do that. Some of it is through marketing agents as well. And some of our members, they're traveling months and months of the year to meet with their customers. So I think that is really important. How we manage China or other companies, and whether they be state-owned companies or not, how they buy up and invest in our industry needs to be balanced. Sometimes companies, regardless of how they're owned, are good actors, and others are not. And so we have to balance that with the rules that we have in place. And the Canada Investment Act might not necessarily be good enough for our sector.
You should know that we've changed, thanks to amendments I made to the Canada Investment Act that have just been proclaimed, that the threshold for state-owned enterprises for countries we don't have a bilateral relationship with, the threshold for review by Investment Canada is now $0. In other words, every acquisition can get reviewed. But were you consulted, or your organization consulted, on the development of this strategy?
On the Indo-Pacific strategy, yes.
And do you see any of what the industry needs reflected in the strategy?
Really, I think the difficult part for us, because for agri-food, a lot of the strategy was driven by Agriculture Canada, that seafood is a small part of the broader portfolio. And so we were very pleased to be consulted, to be invited to participate in the industry working group.
Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, particularly in the international oceans, is a major issue, particularly in Asia. How is it possible to have a successful Indo-Pacific strategy if the countries from that region are breaking most international rules in their fishing in international waters and what they do with that product?
To really tackle IUU fishing, and we recognize there are definitely hotspots, much as you just said, it's multifaceted, and it takes every country and certainly every major seafood consuming jurisdiction to do to use multi tools to address that, whether it be the Port States Measures Act or other specific issues to really try and prevent IUU products from getting into market.
Does the strategy address that at all?
I'd have to take a closer look, but I would think it would be a minor part of the overall strategy because, again, seafood is a small part of it. There's other tools that governments have.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Looks like we'll have to have Mr. Landsberg and come back to our committee to have this discussion a little bit further then. Let's go to Mr. Erskine Smith.
Thanks very much, and Ms. Joseph, I really appreciate what you've shared here because it's reasonable and realistic in terms of talking about an energy future that is based on what the world needs, not a pipe dream, not a fantasy, which I regret that quite often seems to be what bleeds from other political parties across the aisle. So I want to ask you very specifically. When it comes to reducing global emissions, is there a case for Canadian LNG to be part of that solution?
Yes. So because the world has been increasing its use of coal, and it's increasing its use of coal because it wants a high volume, low cost source of energy, the alternative to that has a lot of the same characteristics, but half the emissions is natural gas. And LNG from Canada, which would be made with some of the highest methane, some of the highest emission mitigation. Many of the projects that are coming online are going to be electrified. So the lowest emission is how it's produced, going to displace these higher emitting fuels, which these countries continue to use. As I said, India has plans to double coal production by 2030, which is all for electricity generation. So that means major emissions increases, much more significant than Canada's emissions. And we have to look at what role can we play in that.
So the way that I see it is Canada can be left behind, and the world has the world's environment is worse off, or we can lead the world by making sure that we can get our energy to market. Now, I would ask, specifically when it comes to hydrogen, because I think there's this misnomer that it's hydrogen or natural gas. Can you comment on that it's not a binary thing, but it's hydrogen and natural gas? Could you comment on that quickly? It's
absolutely hydrogen and natural gas, and some of the first hydrogen that's going to come onto market and is starting to be developed in terms of projects, including in Alberta, are blue hydrogen projects that benefit from the carbon capture capacity and resource and geology, but then can be exported as ammonia. And that's an option that also exists, in the East, if people want to pursue it. And then, of course, in Eastern Canada, there's a lot of goals around green hydrogen, the use of wind to produce that. So there is no and or, because the goal is more. And what is going to fill that need for human access to affordable, reliable energy that countries are not compromising on.
And I appreciate that. And the goal is more, I think, is a great message that I hope my colleagues are listening to. And just one quick final question, and then I do hope to get to my friends at the Canadian cattle producers. Much of the tech associated with clean tech, green tech, however it is defined, is produced in jurisdictions with very poor environmental records. Are we accurately accounting for the emissions that go into the production of that technology? Just if you can, 10, 15 seconds, sorry that it's short.
I don't think there's a lot of discussion about the supply chains and the environmental impacts, not just in terms of emissions, but in terms of water pollution, land, like the mining. There's a lot of environmental impacts associated with.
I hate to cut you off, but let's just leave it there and say more needs to be talked about. To my friends at the cattle producers, the WTO other trade challenges. I just want to provide in the last minute or so, if you can talk about that, and specifically as a starting point for that, when the interim agreement with the UK was signed, one of your American counterparts, their comment to me was, y'all got screwed, at the same time when the Liberals were celebrating the ascension of this agreement. So I'm wondering if just in the last 60 seconds or so, if you can talk about some of the trade challenges that exist and the role that the WTO can play in terms of helping to mitigate some of those challenges within your sector, but if you can broaden it just about your knowledge more generally as well.
So as I said, we've utilized the WTO dispute settlement mechanism and have a precedent in one particular instance that we can and do reference when dealing with our trading relationship with really our largest partner. That's one scenario. Another scenario really is really addressing some of these challenges, these non-tariff barriers right up front, on initiation of these agreements, and working obviously very, very much in part with our trade negotiators to ensure that our concerns are being heard, and that we're really being represented in a fair agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton. Mr.
Thank
Burke.
you.